Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're not marching into battle or deciphering dusty royal decrees or even admiring gigantic pyramids. Tonight you're tucked away indoors and so are the ancient Egyptians. Imagine it outside the Nile has overflowed, rain is pattering, and your sandals are muddy beyond saving. Inside the house smells faintly of baked bread. Rush mats are damp at the edges, and you can hear the hiss of water against mud brick walls. What do you do with no Netflix, no phones, and certainly no Candy Crush apps? You play board games. Yes, the people who built pyramids also had to figure out what to do when it rained too much. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive a day in their soggy sandals. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to join in the fun, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little community stretches across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a humble Egyptian home, maybe somewhere along a backwater channel of the Nile. The rain doesn't always come in torrents, but flooding season meant you could be stuck indoors for days at a time. Imagine the floor packed earth, smoothed from years of bare feet. Maybe there's a low table, maybe not. The family gathers around not with glowing screens, but with small carved boards, pebbles and sticks. Entertainment was simple, but no less engaging. You can almost hear the gentle scrape of a reed stylus across a soft clay tile, carving out lines for a makeshift game board. Historians agree that Egypt's geography dictated so much of its culture, the Nile flooding rhythmically like a giant calendar no one could ignore. But they still argue whether the heavy rains themselves directly inspired the invention of indoor games, or whether those games came first and just happened to be perfect for rainy days. Either way, the image holds families sheltering from the weather, children, restless adults reaching for the familiar comfort of tokens and patterns. And here's where it gets oddly relatable. You've probably sat around on a rainy Sunday staring at a Monopoly board, rolling dice, slowly losing patience with your family. Ancient Egyptians did the same, except instead of arguing about hotels on boardwalk, they argued about who got to move their little pebble onto the next square of a scratched-out Senate board. And unlike your Monopoly money, which smells faintly of cardboard and frustration, their pieces might have been carved ivory, polished wood, or plain-baked clay. Close your eyes and picture the flickering lamplight. Oil lamps burning thickly, shadows playing on plastered walls. The game pieces smooth from countless hands, clicking softly as they're placed down. Maybe there's an older brother who cheats by nudging his piece forward when no one's looking. Maybe grandma's muttering a protective charm under her breath, convinced the gods are watching her moves. The atmosphere is familiar in its warmth. Mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptians are credited with inventing some of the earliest documented board games in human history, Senet being the crown jewel. Archaeologists have found boards carved into stone, drawn on plaster, even sketched on pottery shards. The evidence is overwhelming. They played, and they played a lot. Quirky tidbit. Sometimes those boards weren't made of anything permanent at all. A kid might just scratch a quick grid onto the ground with a stick, grab a few pebbles, and call it a day. The rain washes it away tomorrow, but for now, it works. Low tech, high fun. As you lean back against the imagined mud brick wall, think of the coziness. Rain against clay, laughter in dim light, the satisfaction of a piece landing in just the right square. This is where human creativity blossomed, not always in temples or battles, but in boredom, in the spaces where life slowed down. And the Egyptians knew this well. Their homes, often small and simple, were filled with everyday tools and tiny luxuries. A jug of beer brewed from barley, a basket of dates, the smell of onions and garlic hanging in the air. The board game became a centerpiece not just to pass time, but to connect generations. Children learned rules from parents who learned from grandparents. It wasn't just play, it was continuity. Now here's a thought to drift on. If you were plopped into that ancient home right now, would you know how to play? Probably not. Even modern experts don't agree on the exact rules of many Egyptian games. You'd be the outsider, fumbling with the pieces, while a 6-year-old laughed at you. And maybe that's comforting. Across thousands of years, one truth remains: you'd still be bad at family game night. So you sink into that moment, listening to the rain soften your eyes, following the snake-like lines scratched onto a board. One game ends, another begins. Laughter rises, arguments fade, someone wins, someone loses. And outside, the Nile keeps flooding, indifferent to your small indoor dramas. This is only the beginning. Soon you'll see how these little clay tokens grew into something much grander, something bound up with life, death, and even the afterlife itself. You're still seated on the packed earth floor, the air heavy with the scent of damp clay and warm bread. But now your eyes are drawn to the objects spread out in front of you. Not polished marble chess sets, not factory-made cards, but the simplest beginnings. A handful of clay tokens shaped by thumb and forefinger, still bearing the impressions of someone's nail. A flat board carved hastily with straight lines, its grooves darkened from countless uses. You can almost feel the grit under your palm as you run your fingers across it. This is where board games begin, not as grand, polished heirlooms for kings, but as improvisations. Someone once reached for a pebble and said, "This can be a piece." Someone else picked up a reed and scratched a line into the dirt and said, "Here's the board." From there, imagination filled in the rest. Clay became wood became ivory, and simple scratches became elaborate grids. Over centuries, Egyptians refined these little pastimes until they weren't just ways to kill time, but miniature worlds where life and fate could play out. Historians are fairly certain that Egypt's earliest game boards date back as far as 3100 BCE, found carved on tomb walls or laid carefully in burial chambers. But they still argue whether some of those scratchy patterns were actually game boards at all, or just idle doodles left by bored workers. That debate has rumbled on for decades because the line between play and ritual in Egypt was thin and shifting. Was a square grid for fun, or was it a spiritual map of life's journey? Maybe, as with many things, it was both. You bend lower, picturing one of those simple boards. Not a museum display, not polished under a glass case, but something raw, something living. Imagine an Egyptian potter, hands still dusty from clay, scratching a grid into a leftover shard. He sets it down beside his jug of beer at day's end, calling over a neighbor to play. Their laughter mixes with the croak of frogs outside the rising Nile waters, creeping toward the village. The token, just a lump of baked clay, clicks softly against the shard as the game begins. Quirky, detail. Not all tokens were symmetrical or even practical. Some looked like animals, hounds, jackals, birds, while others were just uneven lumps. A child might have fashioned them, proud to see their crooked little creation move across the board. Imagine a parent keeping it anyway, just like you might keep a child's lopsided clay cup today. That's the heart of it, imperfect, but treasured. And these games grew with the people. The more Egypt prospered, the more elaborate the boards became. What began as scratches in dirt evolved into carefully carved slabs of wood, decorated with inlays of ivory and precious stones. Some were built to fold portable for travel like ancient briefcases of entertainment. You can picture a merchant along the Nile, tired from a day of trade, unfolding his polished little board in a tavern-like hut, inviting strangers to play while sipping beer from a clay cup. But here's something to make you pause. How many of those boards survived only by accident? Archaeologists have stumbled upon them in tombs, preserved in the still air, waiting for thousands of years. Yet how many hundreds, thousands of simple clay scratchings just dissolved into mud after a rainy season, leaving no trace at all? You're left with the comforting thought that most of Egypt's game nights will remain forever unseen, whispered away by time. The tokens click again in your imagination. Smooth ivory, rough stone, chipped clay, each piece carrying its own history of hands, houses, and rainy evenings. There's something soothing in the thought. While kings built monuments to be remembered forever, the common people were happy enough to leave behind a handful of pebbles arranged in neat little lines. and you can almost hear the transition in your mind from the scratch of a reed stylus carving straight lines into clay to the smooth scrape of a craftsman's chisel cutting an ornate grid into polished wood. The journey from token to board mirrors the journey of Egypt itself. Simple beginnings followed by centuries of refinement until even leisure carried the weight of tradition. One game ends, another begins. Families argue, laugh, cheat, and console. Somewhere across the Nile, a different family is doing the same thing. The river floods, life goes on, and in the quiet corners of their homes, Egyptians are inventing board games without even realizing they're shaping history. The story doesn't stop here. Because soon one particular board game will rise above all the rest, a game that wasn't just about winning or losing, but about the very mystery of existence itself. Your fingers still hover above those rough clay tokens, but now the game begins to transform in your imagination. The simple scratched lines of a child's grid slowly morph into something more enduring, more mysterious. You blink, and suddenly you're staring at Senet, the great board game of Egypt, the one whispered about in tombs painted on walls and buried beside pharaohs. This isn't just pebbles on dirt anymore. This is the game of passing a name as ominous as it is playful. Picture the board, 30 squares arranged in 3 neat rows of 10. The squares march like steps, like a winding path you must follow. Some of them are just plain waiting patiently for your piece. Others are marked with signs, good or bad, depending on how fate feels about you tonight. You rolled sticks instead of dice, 4 little casting sticks, smooth and flat, one side painted dark, the other light. Toss them into the air, hear them clatter on the packed earth, and count how many show their pale side. That's your move. Already you sense it's less about control and more about surrendering to chance. The Egyptians played this game for over 2,000 years, longer than any video game franchise you've ever seen. Imagine that generations upon generations learning the same rules, feeling the same triumph when their piece slipped safely past a trap square, the same frustration when bad luck sent them tumbling backward. Historians agree that Senet shows up as early as 3100 BCE, etched into tomb walls and drawn onto pottery. It traveled across dynasties, surviving fashion, politics, and even invasions. That kind of staying power is rare, like Monopoly refusing to die, but with far more cosmic significance. Because here's where things get heavy. Senet wasn't just a game. Somewhere along the way it turned into a ritual, a metaphor, maybe even a rehearsal for the afterlife. The squares started to take on meanings: safe passage, rebirth, punishment, purification. Your little piece wasn't just a token anymore, it was you, your soul, making its precarious journey through life, death, and whatever waited beyond. Lose the game and maybe you risked more than bragging rights. Win it, and you symbolically proved yourself ready for eternity. Historians still argue whether Senet was always intended this way, or whether it started out as simple fun and only later gained spiritual baggage. Was it a sacred practice from the start, or did board priests retrofit meaning onto an already beloved pastime? The debate is endless. What's undeniable is that by the New Kingdom, the game shows up in funerary art with unmistakable symbolism. The deceased seated at a Senet board, calmly playing their way into the next world. Imagine lying in your tomb, your sarcophagus painted with you forever mid-game, as though Osiris himself is waiting for your move. And just like that, you're sucked into the drama. The flickering lamp casts long shadows over the 30 squares. Across from you sits not a sibling or a neighbor, but perhaps an ancestor, or even a deity cloaked in indigo and gold. Their eyes never blink, their fingers steady as they push a piece forward. You toss the sticks again. Clatter, count, move. Every turn feels like fate itself, leaning closer to whisper in your ear. But don't forget the quirks, because not every Senet board was polished ivory with golden inlays. Sometimes they were crude wooden planks with lines scratched on, or even a quick sketch on a mud floor. Some boards folded, carried easily under the arm like a lunchbox of destiny. Some were shaped into elaborate furniture with drawers to hold pieces and sticks. Archaeologists even found one tucked beside Tutankhamun, as if he planned to spend eternity rolling sticks against the gods themselves. Meanwhile, some kid down the street probably played on nothing more than a broken pot shard, laughing when his dog ran off with one of the tokens. Picture the noise of it. The slap of sticks on wood, the tiny click as a carved ivory piece moves forward. Someone groans, someone cheers, someone accuses another of cheating. And here's a funny thought you've probably argued during a board game too, pointing out you can't move that far, or that's not how the rule works. Imagine that argument stretched across millennia. Somewhere in 1500 BCE, a family is fighting over a sonnet rule interpretation, and somewhere in 2025 you're doing the same over Uno. Continuity, thy name is family squabbles. But step back a moment. Look at the art left behind painted walls, showing elegant players, men and women alike, sitting straight-backed on stools, bent attentively over the sonnet board. Their clothes are crisp white linen, their jewelry glinting, their wigs perfectly coiffed. To us, it looks formal, ritualistic. To them, maybe it was just a rainy afternoon pastime that happened to carry cosmic undertones. It's like if archaeologists dug up a future Monopoly board and decided it represented humanity's spiritual journey through capitalism. Not entirely wrong, but maybe not what the players were thinking at the time. The quirky detail here: some Senate boards included not-so-subtle trap squares, like one literally known as the House of Water. Land on it, and your piece was basically drowned, forced back to start. Imagine the ancient version of Do Not Pass. Go do not collect $200, but with divine consequences. And yes, families would have laughed or groaned about it, even as priests later declared it's symbolic of the soul's peril in the netherworld. Entertainment and theology hand in hand, like peanut butter and jelly, but with more jackal-headed gods. As you lean closer in your mind, you realize you'd be absolutely terrible at this game. Not just because you don't know the rules, the exact rules are still debated, reconstructed from fragments and guesswork, but because you'd have no idea when to feel triumphant and when to feel doomed. You might win and yet symbolically lose your eternal soul, depending on which scholar's rulebook you're following. Talk about stressful family game night. The lamplight flickers and the pieces seem to move themselves. A carved pawn shaped like a bird hops forward. A smooth disc slides backward. The gods chuckle unseen, watching mortals squabble over destiny disguised as play. Outside, the Nile surges with floodwater, indifferent to your tiny struggles, but inside everything depends on the fall of 4 sticks and the path of your pawn. You sink deeper into the thought, how fragile, how human, to carve meaning into chance, to imagine eternity in 30 squares, and yet how comforting too. With Senate, Egyptians could turn chaos into order, randomness into story. And as you close your eyes, you can almost hear the echoes of thousands of games played across thousands of years. The laughter, the curses, the prayers, rolling like distant thunder across time. You're still cross-legged on that cool earthen floor, the lamplight flickering against mud brick walls, but your gaze drifts now toward the way Egyptians stirred chance into their games. It wasn't enough just to move pieces along a board. The thrill came from randomness, from letting fate nudge your tokens this way or that, as if the gods themselves were giving a sly little push. Only dice as you know them today, those neat little cubes with pips, didn't exist yet. Instead, Egyptians had something far stranger, far simpler, and maybe even more satisfying in its unpredictability: sticks, pebbles, and sometimes even animal bones. Imagine it. A player reaches for 4 small throwing sticks, each flat on one side and rounded on the other. They toss them into the air, and as they land with different combinations, flat sides up, round sides down, the number of moves is decided. It's like dice, but with the earthy thunk of wood instead of the rattling clatter of plastic. There's a lovely tactile sound in your mind: the sticks hitting the packed ground, the hush of expectation, the groan when the throw comes up short. You probably feel the same little rush you get when rolling a modern die, except this version connects you to the humblest objects: sticks cut from a reed, smoothed by a bored hand. Mainstream fact here: archaeologists have found these stick dice buried in tombs alongside sonnet boards, sometimes carved carefully, sometimes as crude as half-whittled twigs. They show up in art too, painted on tomb walls where players are frozen mid-game hands, poised in eternal toss. That's how we know chance mattered. It was painted into eternity. But quirky detail. Some historians argue Egyptians may have used knuckle bones, the ankle bones of sheep or goats called astragali, as proto-dice. Picture a group of friends hunched together, tossing animal bones in the dim glow of an oil lamp, each side representing a different outcome. It sounds almost morbid, but also wildly practical. You eat dinner, then you recycle the leftovers into a game. Waste not, want not. One bone determines your fate, and maybe a second bone helps you brag about your luck. Historians still argue whether randomness in Egyptian games was purely for fun, or if it was infused with ritual weight. Did they believe the gods guided each throw, whispering through gravity, or were they just laughing at a bad toss, same as you would when someone rolls a 1 in Dungeons & Dragons? The truth is, slippery. Some temple scenes suggest divination, others just suggest fun. Maybe, like most human things, it was both at once. Picture again the quiet room, the rain pattering outside, a child holding a handful of pebbles. Instead of sticks, maybe they scatter stones across the floor, counting the ones that land inside a scratched circle. Their laughter echoes simple, pure. No ivory, no jewels, no complexity, just stones and time to kill. And here's your modern callback, remember, playing jacks on the kitchen floor or marbles under the table, trying not to lose your prized shooter. Egyptians had their versions less polished but just as competitive. Somewhere across time, a kid was pouting because their pebble throw didn't land right. The more formal games, though, leaned toward the controlled randomness of sticks. Toss them, count the flats, move the piece. There was rhythm in it, almost ritual. Toss, count, move, like the beat of rain against your roof tonight, steady and hypnotic. You can almost lose yourself in the cycle. The pieces glide forward, destiny clicks into place, and you're both player and spectator to fate. And while sticks might seem crude, the wealthier classes polished the experience. Imagine golden sticks inlaid with ebony laid out beside a polished Senate board. A noblewoman in saffron linen lifts them delicately, tosses them with a practiced hand, and smirks at her opponent. Luck dressed in luxury. Meanwhile, out in a fishing village, a farmer scratches a circle in dirt and tosses whatever stones he can find. Same thrill, different wrapping paper. You feel the continuity. Games didn't just belong to kings, they belonged to everyone. Chance belonged to everyone. And randomness, whether it's Monopoly dice or Mario Kart blue shells, has always been the great equalizer. Even a child could defeat an elder if the sticks fell kindly. That tension between skill and chance kept the Egyptians hooked. You feel it in your gut, that little hope, every time you pick up a die or a stick that maybe fortune favors you. Now consider this: some scholars propose that the randomness in Egyptian games symbolized more than fun. It was life itself, unpredictable, unfair, sometimes merciful, sometimes cruel. You move your piece forward, you think you're winning, and then fate knocks you back. Sound familiar? That's Monday morning for most of us. But for Egyptians, this wasn't just an annoyance. It was philosophy played out on a board. The universe wasn't fixed. Destiny could be swayed by a flick of the wrist. Let's not forget the atmosphere. Picture a group of players huddled by lamplight sticks tossed into a shallow clay dish, the clatter echoing. A child leans forward, eyes wide. An elder mutters a prayer. Someone cheats, someone laughs, someone complains. Outside, frogs croak by the swollen Nile and the rain beats on. The world shrinks to a circle of light, a handful of sticks, and the thrill of chance. And here's the quirky human twist. What do you do if you lose too many times? Some depictions hint that people whispered protective spells or wore amulets while playing, as if the gods could be persuaded to tip luck in their favor. Imagine slipping on a charm before family game night, muttering under your breath, "Osiris, please let me win just once." Honestly, you've probably done the same, maybe not invoking Osiris, but wishing the universe would cut you some slack before your cousin wipes the floor with you again. One last sound for your ears before you drift further, the hollow clack of sticks hitting the ground, the quiet gasp as the outcome is revealed, the triumphant shout or groan that follows. You lean back against that mud brick wall, listening as the rain softens. The game goes on and chance weaves itself into history, one throw at a time. You're still cross-legged on that cool earthen floor, the lamplight flickering against mud brick walls, but your gaze drifts now toward the way Egyptians stirred chance into their games. It wasn't enough just to move pieces along a board. The thrill came from randomness, from letting fate nudge your tokens this way or that, as if the gods themselves were giving a sly little push. Only dice as you know them today, those neat little cubes with pips, didn't exist yet. Instead, Egyptians had something far stranger, far simpler, and maybe even more satisfying in its unpredictability: sticks, pebbles, and sometimes even animal bones. Imagine it. A player reaches for 4 small throwing sticks, each flat on one side and rounded on the other. They toss them into the air, and as they land with different combinations, flat sides up, round sides down, the number of moves is decided. It's like dice, but with the earthy thunk of wood instead of the rattling clatter of plastic. There's a lovely tactile sound in your mind, the sticks hitting the packed ground, the hush of expectation, the groan when the throw comes up short. You probably feel the same little rush you get when rolling a modern die, except this version connects you to the humblest objects, sticks cut from a reed, smoothed by a bored hand. Mainstream fact here: archaeologists have found these stick dice buried in tombs alongside sonnet boards, sometimes carved carefully, sometimes as crude as half-whittled twigs. They show up in art too, painted on tomb walls where players are frozen mid-game hands, poised in eternal toss. That's how we know chance mattered. It was painted into eternity. But quirky detail. Some historians argue Egyptians may have used knuckle bones, the ankle bones of sheep or goats called astragali, as proto-dice. Picture a group of friends hunched together, tossing animal bones in the dim glow of an oil lamp, each side representing a different outcome. It sounds almost morbid, but also wildly practical. You eat dinner, then you recycle the leftovers into a game. Waste not, want not. One bone determines your fate, and maybe a second bone helps you brag about your luck. Historians still argue whether randomness in Egyptian games was purely for fun, or if it was infused with ritual weight. Did they believe the gods guided each throw, whispering through gravity, or were they just laughing at a bad toss, same as you would when someone rolls a 1 in Dungeons & Dragons? The truth is, slippery. Some temple scenes suggest divination, others just suggest fun. Maybe, like most human things, it was both at once. Picture again the quiet room, the rain pattering outside, a child holding a handful of pebbles. Instead of sticks, maybe they scatter stones across the floor, counting the ones that land inside a scratched circle. Their laughter echoes simple, pure. No ivory, no jewels, no complexity, just stones and time to kill. And here's your modern callback, remember, playing jacks on the kitchen floor or marbles under the table, trying not to lose your prized shooter. Egyptians had their versions, less polished but just as competitive. Somewhere across time, a kid was pouting because their pebble throw didn't land right. The more formal games, though, leaned toward the controlled randomness of sticks. Toss them, count the flats, move the piece. There was rhythm in it, almost ritual: toss, count, move, toss, count, move. Like the beat of rain against your roof tonight, steady and hypnotic. You can almost lose yourself in the cycle. The pieces glide forward, destiny clicks into place, and you're both player and spectator to fate. And while sticks might seem crude, the wealthier classes polished the experience. Imagine golden sticks inlaid with ebony laid out beside a polished senate board. A noblewoman in saffron linen lifts them delicately, tosses them with a practiced hand, and smirks at her opponent. Luck dressed in luxury. Meanwhile, out in a fishing village, a farmer scratches a circle in dirt and tosses whatever stones he can find. Same thrill, different wrapping paper. You feel the continuity. Games didn't just belong to kings, they belonged to everyone. Chance belonged to everyone. And randomness, whether it's Monopoly dice or Mario Kart blue shells, has always been the great equalizer. Even a child could defeat an elder if the sticks fell kindly. That tension between skill and chance kept the Egyptians hooked. You feel it in your gut, that little hope, every time you pick up a die or a stick that maybe fortune favors you. Now consider this: some scholars propose that the randomness in Egyptian games symbolized more than fun. It was life itself, unpredictable, unfair, sometimes merciful, sometimes cruel. You move your piece forward, you think you're winning, and then fate knocks you back. Sound familiar? That's Monday morning for most of us. But for Egyptians, this wasn't just an annoyance. It was philosophy played out on a board. The universe wasn't fixed. Destiny could be swayed by a flick of the wrist. Let's not forget the atmosphere. Picture a group of players huddled by lamplight sticks tossed into a shallow clay dish, the clatter echoing. A child leans forward, eyes wide. An elder mutters a prayer. Someone cheats, someone laughs, someone complains. Outside, frogs croak by the swollen Nile and the rain beats on. The world shrinks to a circle of light, a handful of sticks and the thrill of chance. And here's the quirky human twist. What do you do if you lose too many times? Some depictions hint that people whispered protective spells or wore amulets while playing, as if the gods could be persuaded to tip luck in their favor. Imagine slipping on a charm before family game night, muttering under your breath, "Osiris, please let me win just once." Honestly, you've probably done the same, maybe not invoking Osiris, but wishing the universe would cut you some slack before your cousin wipes the floor with you again. One last sound for your ears before you drift further: the hollow clack of sticks hitting the ground, the quiet gasp as the outcome is revealed, the triumphant shout or groan that follows. You lean back against that mud brick wall, listening as the rain softens. The game goes on and chance weaves itself into history, one throw at a time. Picture yourself back on that packed earth floor, the rain still ticking against the mud brick walls like 1,000 tiny fingers drumming an endless rhythm. The Nile has swelled, and your little house is cocooned in damp air, the edges of the rush mats curling slightly where water has seeped in. Tonight isn't about kings or priests, it's about family. The space is small, yes, but it's full of warmth, chatter, and the kind of chaos that feels comfortable once you settle into it. You draw closer to the oil lamp in the corner, its flame wobbling against a clay wall, and notice the way shadows grow long and stretch thin across the room, dancing with each flicker. And here in this glow, the family night begins. The children are restless, their hair still damp from a dash into the rain before being shooed inside. Their laughter has a high, sharp note to it, like the cry of seabirds bouncing off plastered walls. A mother sets down a small wicker basket of dates, a jug of beer, beside it, the sweet and sour scent mixing with that of onions drying overhead. You rub your stomach. The food is heavy but comforting, and the company makes even the humblest meal taste like a feast. The older brother fiddles with the game board, pretending to line up pieces, but really just trying to sneak an advantage. The grandmother clears her throat with a kind of ceremonial authority, as if she alone knows the right rules, though historians still argue whether anyone even then truly followed fixed rules for Senet, or if the game shifted with every household. The board rests between them, scratched squares darkened with use, pebbles lined in a crooked row. The tokens aren't uniform, one is smooth, clay, another chipped ivory, one lopsided piece that looks suspiciously like a duck. Quirky detail: a child made that duck, and though it doesn't stand properly, the family insists on using it every game. It is treasured precisely because it wobbles. You smile, realizing you've seen the same thing in your own life, a favorite mug cracked and glued back together, still the only one you reach for. Imperfection has a way of sticking with us. As you watch, the family's conversation flows. The father jokes about how he always loses even when he cheats. "Fate hates me," he mutters, rolling the stick dice again. The children laugh, pointing and jeering when his piece lands back at the beginning. You chuckle too, because if you've ever been stuck At the start of a game, while everyone else races ahead, you know the feeling. Maybe Monopoly Hotels, maybe Mario Kart's dreaded blue shell, same frustration, same groan. The room is alive with sound, the scrape of tokens on clay, the gurgle of beer poured into cups, the crackle of firewood. You can feel the closeness, the togetherness of a home where everyone crowds into one space because there aren't separate rooms to vanish into. In this intimacy, games don't just entertain, they bind. A round of Senate becomes a conversation, a rivalry, and a story all at once. Someone cheats, someone protests, someone wins, and suddenly the whole evening is defined by that tiny drama. And outside, the Nile keeps swelling as if it couldn't care less about your victories or losses. Historians are certain about one thing: board games were not just for elites. Yes, exquisite carved boards have been found in tombs of kings, but the simplest versions, the scratched tiles, the pebbles, belong to ordinary homes. That democratic spirit made play a universal human thread, and yet debates remain. Was every scratched grid meant for play? Or were some chalky etchings simple doodles, idle marks made by children? The line blurs, leaving room for us to imagine a family night just like this, where play mattered more than permanence. You notice the father leaning back, stretching his arms, sighing at his poor luck. The grandmother mutters something under her breath. It might be a charm, it might be a grumble about the younger generation forgetting how to play properly. Either way, the family listens. They always listen when she speaks, even if they roll their eyes. You think of your own elders, their little rules, their quiet authority over household traditions. Some things never change. There's comfort in the rhythm roll move, laugh, argue, snack. The rain provides its own soundtrack outside, a gentle percussion under the voices inside. You sink deeper into the scene, feeling the heat of the lamp, the faint grit of clay dust in the air. One child yawns, leaning against the wall, eyelids fluttering, but still refusing to abandon their token. Even sleep can wait when you're one move away from victory. The quirky detail doesn't end with the duck piece. Look closer, and you'll see one child tapping the sticks 3 times before throwing them, convinced this ritual brings luck. It's adorable but also telling, because in Egypt, chance was rarely just chance. It carried whispers of the god's will. Every throw felt significant, like a microcosm of fate unfolding on a tabletop. And so a family night, playful and cozy, also carried traces of the sacred. As the game stretches on, tension rises. A close race, one piece nearly at the end, another trailing but catching up fast. Voices grow louder, laughter sharper. Someone accuses the older brother of nudging his piece forward again. He protests with dramatic outrage, hands lifted, eyes wide in mock innocence. Everyone laughs except perhaps the grandmother, who looks genuinely unconvinced. You realize you're grinning, caught up in the drama yourself. It's absurd, and yet it feels timeless. The night wears on. The food dwindles, the oil lamp burns lower, and the rain softens into a steady hush. At last a winner is declared. Cheers and groans follow the usual mix of triumph and disappointment. But no one storms away. Instead, they begin setting up for another round, because winning wasn't the point, togetherness was. The board isn't just a game, it's a hearth, a circle that gathers everyone in. You lean back against the imagined wall, your own eyelids heavy now. The family still chatters, voices fading into the rhythm of rain. There's something beautiful here, the ordinariness of joy, the universality of gathering around a game on a rainy night. Thousands of years melt away and you feel as if you've joined them, not as a guest but as part of the family. The laughter in that mud brick home drifts away in your imagination, dissolving like smoke, and suddenly you're walking somewhere much quieter. Your bare feet echo in a cool passage, the walls close, and painted the air stale with the weight of centuries. You've stepped into an Egyptian tomb, and strangely even here, among painted gods and golden treasures, the games haven't disappeared. They've followed you into the afterlife. The Egyptians didn't treat their board games as mere distractions. Senet especially. That game of passing was more than a rainy day amusement. It was carried into death itself. Archaeologists have found exquisitely carved Senet boards laid carefully among funerary goods, sitting beside jars of food, amulets and jewelry. Imagine the reverence in that act of family, tucking the beloved game beside the deceased, convinced it would be just as necessary in the next life as bread or beer. If you thought your grandma was serious about winning, try matching the Egyptians who saw their game boards as literal passports to eternity. You pause, picturing a noble's tomb walls glowing with ochre, cobalt and green pigments. There on one panel, a figure sits cross-legged before a low table, the grid of Senet squares etched clearly, his hand hovering above tiny ivory pieces. It's not just a mural of leisure, it's a promise. When I rise in the next world, the painting says I'll still play, and I'll still win. Mainstream fact: one of the most famous tomb discoveries, that of Tutankhamun, contained multiple Senet boards. Some were portable with drawers to hold carved pieces polished smooth by the hands of a boy king gone too soon. His afterlife kit wasn't complete without them. Quirky tidbit: some of these boards had elaborate secret compartments, as though even death itself might demand a little trickery, a place to stash dice away from meddling spirits. And here's the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Senet in the tomb was purely symbolic, just art and ritual, or if the deceased were genuinely expected to use it in some mysterious metaphysical sense. Was the game meant to be played by the soul, or was it only a metaphor carved in wood and stone? The argument continues, and you can almost hear scholars raising voices like bickering family members over rules. The deeper you go into this thought, the more you feel the weight of silence in the tomb. Imagine kneeling before a board set beside a mummy, the lamplight flickering against painted hieroglyphs. Every shadow seems alive, every carved god watching. You place a token on the board, half expecting the wrappings to stir the ancient player, ready to resume where they left off. The atmosphere is not frightening, though more like stepping into a library where the books are games and the stories are told with sticks, stones and fate. The Egyptians believed life was a journey through challenges, and Senet mapped those trials square by square. To bury the game was to bury a guide, a way of ensuring the soul wouldn't stumble in the dark. Think of it as the world's oldest travel guide, except instead of top 10 restaurants. Along the Nile, it offered an abstract road to immortality. You smile at the thought: if the afterlife is endless, you'd better pack some entertainment. The clink of tokens returns to your ears. In your mind's eye, the pieces aren't clay or wood anymore, but glowing with shell gold in the dim light. You picture priests chanting, sliding the pieces across a board as part of a ritual demonstration, reminding the living that play and prayer weren't so different. And then you recall that curious overlap, historians pointing out that a Senet board wasn't just fun, it could also be a protective charm, an object infused with symbolic meaning. A child might see only a game, while an elder whispered invocations under their breath with every move. Now drift further. Imagine yourself a tomb builder pausing from chiseling a ceiling mural of Nut, goddess of the sky. You wipe sweat from your brow, then absent-mindedly scratch a small game grid into a plaster patch with your stylus. Will anyone know millennia later if that was ritual or boredom? That's the mystery. The line between play and devotion is as blurred as wet ink. It's soothing to think that even among golden masks and alabaster jars, something as humble as a board game could take pride of place. It wasn't just the towering monuments that defined Egypt's vision of eternity. It was also the little things: laughter preserved in wood arguments, frozen in ivory tokens, love wrapped up in the memory of play. Life's continuity stretched into death's silence. You lean against the imagined wall of that tomb, hearing distant echoes, smelling faint traces of resin and stone. Maybe you picture yourself holding one of those portable boards, the polished wood, cool under your fingertips. How many hands touched it before? How many whispered over it, argued, or rejoiced in its tiny victories? A whole life contained in 30 squares. And then you think again of Tutankhamun, buried with not one but several boards. If a king needed spares, what does that say about the seriousness of the game You chuckle softly, imagining the boy king sighing, "Better pack backups in case eternity gets long." A human moment hidden in royal grandeur. The tomb grows quieter in your imagination, the flickering lamp dimming. Outside, the desert stretches endlessly, the Nile still flows and life continues. But here, among hieroglyphs and offerings, the game waits. Just as it did in homes, just as it did on stormy nights, it sits ready, timeless, unbroken. Play was never left behind, it was carried forward square by square into forever. You lean back a little still in that mud brick home in your imagination, but your gaze begins to drift outward. If you close your eyes, you can picture the contrast. On one hand, a child scratching a rough board into the dirt floor, laughing as a pebble piece tips over. On the other, a pharaoh reclining in a palace chamber, his board shimmering with ivory inlay and gilded trim. The same pastime, the same game of senet, perhaps yet separated by layers of wealth and power that would have felt like different worlds. Think of the commoner's board, improvised, ephemeral, a line of squares gouged into a potsherd, or maybe etched on a lump of unfired clay. These weren't designed to last forever. They were practical, cheap, and endlessly renewable. Rain could wash them away, children could break them, and still by the next evening someone would scratch a new one. The purpose was play, not permanence. For them, it wasn't about showing off, but about keeping restlessness at bay when the Nile's floods hemmed them indoors. Now shift your gaze to the treasure chambers of the wealthy. Archaeologists have uncovered boards made from polished cedar and ebony, their grids inlaid with ivory faience or even lapis lazuli. They glimmered in torchlight, a jewel-like version of the same game scratched into dirt across the village. The wealthy didn't just play, they performed play. Every move on such a board would have carried an extra layer of gravitas, as though the gods themselves leaned over to watch. Some of these elaborate boards were designed with drawers underneath, holding delicately carved playing pieces, each one a work of art in itself. Imagine the tiny jackals and geese, carved in miniature, gleaming under lamplight, whispering of both fortune and prestige. Mainstream fact: some of the most dazzling senet boards ever discovered belong to Tutankhamun. In his tomb, archaeologists found 4 separate boards, each more ornate than the last. They weren't just entertainment, they were symbolic objects bridging play and eternity. To own such a board was to claim not only wealth, but also divine favor, as though the game itself mirrored the endless journey of the soul. Quirky tidbit: a few boards show clear evidence of repairs, wood patched where it cracked, inlays reset when they popped loose. Even kings apparently had the same problem you might have with a wobbly table leg. The difference was that when their furniture broke, it was fixed with rare woods and gold adhesives, not wood glue from the hardware store. And here's where the contrast grows sharper. For the rich, boards doubled as status symbols. Owning an ornate senet set was like having a luxury sports car parked in the courtyard, an object less about utility and more about identity. For the poor, a scratched clay board was anonymous, used until it wore out. Yet, in a curious way, both experiences met at the same human truth: the need to gather, to compete, to fill the slow hours with laughter or tension, to distract from the endless rhythm of the Nile. Historians still argue whether these elaborate boards were used primarily for play, or whether their ceremonial associations made them off-limits for casual use. Were Tutankhamun's sets truly pulled out on rainy nights for a round with the court, or were they more like religious artifacts meant for the afterlife alone? That line blurs, and perhaps it was never fixed in the first place. In ancient Egypt, sacred and mundane often lived side by side. Picture it this way: 2 households both lit by oil lamps. One home is filled with the smoky smell of roasting onions, the sound of children's bare feet padding across packed earth. The other is perfumed with incense, painted walls glowing with candlelight, servants attending silently at the edges. In both spaces, laughter erupts over the same roll of sticks or groans at a lost piece. 2 parallel worlds linked by a grid of 30 squares. You can almost imagine the pharaoh leaning forward trying to mask irritation when his queen's token leaps past his, or a village girl smirking as she beats her older brother with a crooked clay piece she made herself. Both stories dissolve into the same universal moment: victory, defeat, and the fragile pride in between. One detail worth savoring is the portability of the game. Commoners carried pebbles and scratched boards wherever they traveled. Kings had folding boxes with hidden drawers like ancient game consoles. A merchant might tuck his set into a woven basket ready for an idle evening at a riverside inn. A nobleman might call for his servant to bring out a board, polished so brightly that torchlight danced in its surface. Yet in each case the setup was the same: a square grid, tokens, a sense of anticipation. Imagine how it must have felt to lift a carved ivory piece smooth and cool and compare it to the rough weight of a chipped stone token. One radiates luxury, the other radiates immediacy. But in both cases, the token exists to move forward, to embody fate's whim across the board. No matter how expensive the material, the tension of the throw, the uncertainty of outcome was identical. A pharaoh could lose to his sister just as easily as a farmer could lose to his son. And here's a thought to amuse you as you drift. What if some of those royal boards really were played in secret with kings, muttering the same frustrated complaints as any commoner? What if the grand ivory jackals were nudged forward slyly by royal fingers, no less guilty than a child sliding a pebble? In the end, no wealth can prevent a sore loser. So as you settle deeper into this moment, you see how Egyptian board games spanned the spectrum of society. They were scratched on dirt floors, carved into sandstone, painted on plaster, built into folding wooden boxes, and inlaid with precious stones. They were rough, they were refined, they were sacred, they were playful. They belonged to everyone, and in belonging to everyone, they revealed something timeless. Across wealth and class, the need for play was as human as breath. The tokens click in your imagination again, one humble, one magnificent, but the laughter they sparked identical. You lean back against the imagined mud brick wall, the lamplight flickering just enough to cast faint shadows over the scratched-out board at your feet. Until now, you've thought of the games as cozy distractions, tokens, sticks, laughter in the dark. But here's where things begin to take on a different. Picture yourself sliding a little piece of ivory across a board. To your modern mind, it feels like chance, like Monopoly or backgammon. But to an ancient Egyptian, every movement might reflect forces beyond your control, echoes of Ra guiding the sun, or the eternal duel between order and chaos. Play became ritual, and ritual. Historians still argue whether every Senate game was spiritual or whether most were just casual pastimes spiced with superstition. Some suggest the religious meaning was layered on later, once the game had been around for centuries. Others argue the cosmic connection was there from the beginning, written into the squares themselves. The truth, like with many ancient debates, it's likely both. Some evenings, families just wanted to pass the time. On other nights, when storms rumbled outside the flick of a stick and the slid, think of those carved boards discovered in temples. Why put a simple game in a place meant for communion with gods? Maybe because in their eyes, the game was sea. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Some researchers suggest that players muttered prayers or incantations while they played half game, half ritual. Imagine Grandma not only muttering about her cheating grandson, but quietly invoking Taweret, the goddess of childbirth, or Thoth, the master of knowledge, hoping for a lucky throw. That's not exactly your modern Uno night unless you've been S. And the ritual went deeper. In Egyptian belief, existence itself was a balancing act between Mahat, order, harmony, truth, and Isfet, chaos, disorder, destruction. The Nile's floods reminded them every year life depended on keeping that balance. Some scholars propose that when an Egyptian moved a token toward the end of the board, they weren't just winning, they were reinforcing Ma'at, proving that order could triumph. Lose too many times, though, and maybe the creeping doubt set in, were the gods trying to tell you something. You stretch your imagination across thousands of years. A priest sits in a dim temple chamber lit by a small oil lamp Senate board before him. He tosses sticks, watches the tokens advance, and reads omens in the fall. To him, the game is no different from the flight of birds or the casting of lots. It is a conversation with forces unseen. Now tilt that vision back toward the ordinary family, laughing in their home. They don't think of cosmic fate every time they play, but maybe just sometimes they do, just like you might jokingly say, "The universe hates me," after 3 bad dice rolls in a row. Mainstream fact here: inscriptions on some Senate boards link the game directly to the afterlife. The squares are labeled with names like House of Rebirth or House of Happiness, showing that at least in certain contexts, play became prayer, and a win was a promise of safe passage through the next world. And here's the delightful absurdity: scholars don't fully agree on the rules of Senate, and they certainly don't agree on how the religious meaning translated into gameplay. Was winning symbolic of salvation? Was losing an ill omen? Or was the spiritual layer separate, more about the board than the act? The arguments go in circles, like tokens, endlessly looping around the grid. Imagine now the psychological comfort. A farmer might have no control over whether the Nile flooded too little or too much, but inside his home, with a carved board on his lap, he could enact a story where order prevailed, where chaos was kept at bay, where a soul could escape danger square by square. In that tiny ritual, life felt manageable and destiny felt negotiable. The atmosphere in your mind softens. You see a family, the rain pattering outside, tokens sliding across a board. An older woman leans in, whispers a charm, and when the token lands just right, she smiles, believing for a moment that the gods nodded their approval. A child giggles, not understanding the weight of the ritual, just loving the sound of pieces clicking. Both are true. The game is a diversion and a devotion. Here's a whimsical detail. In some boards found in tombs, the final squares are shaped like water channels or stylized doors leading players out of the board. Doesn't that feel like a portal, like the token and maybe the soul it represents has found its way from the earthly realm to something greater? That's not just play, that's symbolic pilgrimage. And yet not every Egyptian took it so seriously. Records suggest plenty of mockery, plenty of playful cheating, plenty of family disputes that sound a lot like your own. The same board that might sit solemnly in a priest's chamber could on another day be the site of a father accusing his son of sneaking a piece forward while no one was looking. That paradox, trivial and sacred at once, is part of what makes these games endlessly fascinating. So as you sit here in imagination, tokens arrayed before you hear both layers at once. The rain outside is ordinary, the laughter inside is warm, but beneath it all the board hums with symbolism, every square a step on a cosmic path. Your hand hesitates, hovering over a token, as though the move you make could ripple far beyond this room, out toward eternity itself. And perhaps that's the gentle magic of these games. They let you live in 2 worlds at once, the playful and the profound. With each roll, each click of clay, you draw closer, not just to a win, but to a reflection of the eternal balance that kept Egyptian life and imagination flowing like the Nile. The night deepens in your imagination, but instead of sleep pulling you down, you lean into the warmth of the hearth and the gentle clatter of tokens. By now you've seen the humble beginnings and the ritual overtones, but here comes another layer. The boards themselves weren't all equal. Just as your modern coffee table comes in flat-pack particle board or heirloom oak Egyptian, game boards spanned the spectrum from dirt scratches to royal luxuries. Close your eyes and picture a child's quick hand dragging a reed across damp earth, the grooves shallow but enough to mark a playing field. It will vanish in a day, washed away by wind or a splash of water, but for that evening it's a perfectly serviceable board. Now contrast that with something found in a pharaoh's tomb, a smooth rectangle of polished ebony inlaid with ivory squares that glimmer faintly in lamplight. One will endure only an hour, the other thousands of years, yet both serve the same purpose, to cradle a little piece of imagination. Mainstream fact here: archaeologists have found Senate boards carved from woodstone, and even faience, a glazed ceramic material prized for its sheen. The wealthier the owner, the more elaborate the design. Some included little drawers to store the tokens neatly, almost like your board game boxes today. Others folded closed, forming tidy cases a traveler could tuck under an arm. Imagine being a weary merchant on the Nile. You've just unloaded jars of oil, baskets of dates, and bundles of linen. The tavern buzzes with chatter smoke curling upward, and you open your folding board. Suddenly, strangers gather, dice are rolled, and you've bridged social gaps without a single shared word. That's not so different from you pulling out a deck of cards on a long train ride, instant companionship. Historians still debate whether the folding boards were a purely practical invention or if they carried symbolic meaning, closing up the cosmos, perhaps when not in use. Some argue the portability shows just how essential these games were. To daily life, no one wanted to travel without entertainment. Others think they symbolize the ability to carry order into uncertain spaces, like taking a bit of home with you wherever you went. And here's a quirky tidbit. Certain boards were double-sided, one surface etched, with senet the other, with a game known today as Hounds and Jackals. It's the ancient equivalent of a 2-for-1 deal, or maybe like flipping over your Monopoly board to reveal Scrabble on the reverse. Except instead of plastic hotels and paper money, you've got carved pegs shaped like tiny animals. One side destiny and afterlife, the other a racing game with charming little hounds chasing jackals in neat rows. Practical certainly, whimsical absolutely. Picture the range in colors, russet and indigo pigments brushed carefully onto ivory inlays, or bright faience tiles gleaming in turquoise and green. Against the candle's flame, the board almost seems alive, each square a jewel. And yet next door, a family scratches crude lines on a potsherd using pebbles as tokens. Two extremes, same pastime. The Egyptians didn't see a contradiction there. And now the debate in your head takes shape. Were games a luxury of the elite? Clearly not. Everyone from farmer to pharaoh found ways to play. The difference was in the materials, the permanence, the craftsmanship. The pharaoh's board might be ornate enough to impress eternity, while the farmer's board would be gone by dawn, but in spirit they were equals. Both invited imagination into the room. Another detail, you might enjoy some elaborate boards were discovered with hieroglyphic inscriptions marking each square, while simpler ones left the meaning to memory. Imagine trying to play Monopoly if only half the board had labels, and you just had to remember where Boardwalk was. Egyptians, it seems, had no problem trusting memory and tradition, and if you forgot, well, maybe you made it up. Rules were flexible when history itself wasn't written on the box. The scene grows cozier in your imagination. You hear the click of ivory, the scrape of wood, the laughter of companions. Perhaps someone cheats, moving a piece, an extra space, and an argument breaks out just enough to make it lively. The game isn't really about victory after all. It's about the rhythm, the pause, the click, the shared moment that slows time. And you can't help but notice the irony. Egyptians built temples, tombs, and obelisks to last for eternity. Yet the thing that feels most alive, most human, are these fragile little boards and the laughter that once surrounded them. The monuments are silent now, but the boards still speak in their way. So as you sit here in this imagined chamber, a token in your hand, you recognize the spectrum, improvised scratches to gilded masterpieces, and you realize that both matter equally because the game was never really about the board itself. It was about what unfolded upon it, the companionship, the echoes of fate, the passage of time made bearable by play. And when you finally place your token down, hearing that soft, almost musical tap, you feel the same comfort an Egyptian must have felt. That brief illusion that in a world of floods and uncertainty, at least here on this board life was ordered and knowable. Your fingers hover above the little tokens scattered across the floor, and for a moment you forget you're not really there. In the dim lamplight, each piece carries a strange weight. Pebbles, carved wood, ivory, smooth as water-worn stone. They are more than placeholders in a game. They are fragments of meaning, each one chosen for what it represented as much as how it moved. Tokens were not simply shapes, they were symbols of the larger world, miniaturized, compressed into something you could hold between two fingers. You tilt one in your imagination, squinting at it, wondering if it's just a lump of clay, or perhaps a jackal, a bird, or something else entirely? Historians often describe the Egyptians as a people obsessed with symbolism, and the tokens prove it. A pebble might stand for a soul shuffling across the board on its journey through life. A jackal could echo the god Anubis, guardian of the dead, padding silently between squares. An ivory carving shaped like a hound might be more than just an animal. It could suggest loyalty, speed, or protection. Even the plainest baked clay lumps were never entirely neutral. They bore the faint memory of the child or craftsman who shaped them, nail marks pressed into the surface, imperfections that made them unique. Some archaeologists even argue that these irregular pieces were cherished precisely because of their imperfection, much like a parent today saves a child's lopsided clay cup, not because it is fine, but because it is theirs. The quirky truth is that not all pieces were usable in the way we'd expect. Imagine a lopsided jackal token that tips over at every move, or a bird-shaped one with wings sticking out too far, making it impossible to fit snugly onto the grid. And yet families kept them. You picture a child giggling each time their clumsy little creation toppled sideways, insisting it was good luck rather than a flaw. The family indulges them because why not? In that moment, the crooked piece becomes part of the ritual woven into the fabric of their play. You smile at the thought, remembering your own childhood games where house rules mattered more than the instructions printed in the box. Archaeologists, of course, pore over these pieces with far less casualness. A polished ivory pawn uncovered in the sand of a tomb is catalogued, photographed, and placed under glass. Yet the most haunting pieces are the plain ones, the pebbles still bearing a thumbprint from 3,000 years ago. A detail so small, and yet it's enough to collapse the centuries, letting you imagine the hand that pressed it. Was it a child, a servant, a priest, passing the time while waiting for a ceremony? No one can say, and historians still argue whether such tokens had strict assigned meanings or whether households simply improvised. Did one family decide that pebbles were safe pieces while ivory hounds were aggressive? Or were these interpretations fluid, changing with each game, each player, each evening? The debates linger like unfinished conversations. You picture an Egyptian household by the river. The rain has eased, frogs croak outside, and the family huddles closer to the lamplight. A father sets down an ivory bird token, sleek and pale, while his son counters with a crude clay lump that lists to one side. The board becomes a little stage, and the tokens act as in a miniature play about fate and fortune. To the family, the difference between ivory and clay matters less than the laughter that follows a bold move. Still, the pieces carry whispers of something larger: ivory, suggesting wealth; clay, suggesting simplicity; animals, hinting at God's stones at eternity. There's something strangely comforting about how ordinary and extraordinary blend together here. On one hand, you have children squabbling over whose piece goes first. On the other, you have tokens that echo cosmic order, divine guardians, and the journey of the soul. It's like playing Monopoly while believing the thimble actually protects your household luck, or that the iron carries the strength of your ancestors. A joke at the table, but with a sliver of seriousness glinting beneath it. As centuries passed, these tokens evolved. Craftsmen began to shape them with greater skill, fashioning smooth inlays of faience ivory or precious stone. Some became standardized, almost uniform little cuboids with sharp edges that wouldn't topple over. Others remained fanciful, carved into dogs or birds because imagination stubbornly resists uniformity. The wealthier the household, the more elaborate the tokens, and yet archaeologists still find simple pebbles lying beside them, as though reminding us that no matter how polished, the ivory play begins with the humblest thing. You lean back against the imagined mud brick wall and let the pieces scatter in your thoughts. Each click of a token against the board is more than sound. It's a reminder that games were metaphors, tiny rehearsals of life's bigger moves. Perhaps that's why so many were placed in tombs. The dead were not meant to enter the afterlife empty-handed. They carried food charms, amulets, and sometimes game boards and tokens, as if eternity too required play. Maybe the gods enjoyed a good laugh when a soul fumbled its move. Open debates persist among scholars. Were tokens coded with rigid rules, or were they fluid symbols shifting like the Nile's floodwaters? Did the jackal always mean death, or sometimes just a funny-shaped dog? Was a bird always divine, or sometimes just a bird? The uncertainty itself is soothing. It leaves you with the sense that even the Egyptians, so fond of order, allowed space for ambiguity, for the playful shrug that says, it doesn't matter what it means as long as we enjoy it. And so the tokens remain scattered across your mind's floor, pebbles and ivory, crooked clay and polished stone, imperfect and yet lasting. They carry the same secret you carry when you play your own games. Today the piece is just a piece until you give it meaning, then suddenly it matters immensely. That little clay jackal might not survive the weight of the centuries, but for one rainy evening in one Egyptian household, it was everything. You're still sitting there cross-legged on the earthen floor, one hand idly resting against a smooth token when your mind wanders away from the flickering lamplight of ancient Egypt and drifts instead to something oddly modern arguments. Not family arguments this time, though there are plenty of those over a sonnet board, but the long drawn-out squabbles of historians. You picture them hunched over fragmentary boards in dusty museum back rooms, spectacles sliding down their noses, debating whether the rules were like checkers, like backgammon or something, so foreign we wouldn't even recognize it as a game. And just as in any household match, the bickering never truly ends. One thing most scholars agree on is that sonnet boards existed, that they were carved, painted, cherished. Archaeologists have unearthed dozens of them, some humble and chipped, some lavish enough to rival a jewelry box. The open question is, what exactly were people doing with them? Were they racing pieces like in modern backgammon? Were they hopping over each other like checkers? Or were they, as one fringe theory suggests, simply using them as calendars, tallying the days of ritual or the movements of stars? Historians still argue whether a groove here or a marking there was a rule, a charm, or just the carver's whim. Imagine you're plopped into that dimly lit room watching these scholars at work. They lean over a Senate replica, rolling knuckle bones, yes, literal sheep ankle bones, used as dice and scribbling furiously every time a piece moves. Some claim the 29 squares were divided into stages of life, birth, trial, death, rebirth. Others insist it was purely recreational, a way to kill time between building pyramids. The truth probably lies in a frustrating middle ground where a game could be both fun and spiritually serious. After all, you've seen Monopoly games that felt like battles for the soul, so why not Senet? Quirky tidbit here, one early Egyptologist swore that the strange zigzag path of the board represented the meandering Nile itself, a miniature river journey guiding tokens from chaos into order. Later, scholars rolled their eyes at this, pointing out that if every squiggly line in Egyptian art meant the Nile, then half of their decorative repertoire would be river maps. Still, the image lingers, tiny pebbles drifting like boats, dodging sandbars of fate. You can't help but smirk. It's exactly the kind of theory that sounds poetic in a lecture and ridiculous at family game night. And the arguments go deeper. Some researchers insist there were strict rules, standardized across Egypt, just lost to time. Others argue the opposite, that every family made up their own version, the way kids today invent house rules in Uno and then shout at each other when outsiders don't know them. Historians still argue whether Senet was a monolithic cultural touchstone or a messy patchwork of local improvisations. In your mind, you lean toward the messy version, because if humans love one thing, it's bending rules to suit themselves. Picture a scholar carefully comparing two ancient boards. One has neat rows of squares, each marked with a symbol, a bird here, a zigzag there. The other has only faint scratched lines, uneven, maybe drawn by a tired mason, at the end of a shift. The scholar furrows her brow, trying to reconcile them. Were both official versions, or was one a child's doodle elevated by time into a mystery? You imagine the ghost of that child laughing across millennia. I was bored, I scratched a box, and now you're writing a thesis on it. Mainstream fact, we do know that Senet endured for millennia, from the Old Kingdom through the New Kingdom and beyond. The consistency of its presence in tombs, in art, and in artifacts shows it mattered deeply, whether as pastime or as spiritual metaphor. But the rules are gone, as if the Egyptians deliberately hid them, whispering, "Figure it out yourselves." Your token feels warm in your palm as you picture two camps of scholars in a long-running tug-of-war. One side declares Senet was a race game, purely luck and strategy, nothing more. The other insists it was a rehearsal for the afterlife, a way to prepare the soul for the hazards beyond death. You imagine them glaring across a conference table, each convinced the other is hopelessly misguided. A third camp chimes in, waving their coffee cup, suggesting the game was both at once, and suddenly everyone is arguing over whose interpretation has the right balance. You smile because it sounds less like academic rigor and more like family drama all over again. And maybe that's the deeper comfort. The ancient Egyptians squabbled over moves, modern scholars squabble over meaning. The cycle repeats as eternal as the Nile's flood. You, sitting cross-legged in your imagined mud-brick room, realize you'll never know the precise rules. You'd be the outsider fumbling at the board while a 6-year-old expert from 2500 BCE trounced you without mercy. The scholars too are fumbling, piecing together fragments like broken tiles. The mystery endures, both infuriating and oddly soothing. So you lean back against the wall, listening to that timeless murmur of voices, ancient and modern, over a board of 29 squares. The candlelight flickers, tokens gleam, arguments rise, laughter follows. The game remains alive, not because the rules survived, but because the debate never stopped. And as your eyes grow heavy, you let the noise of their disagreements wash over you, gentle as the patter of rain on clay. Close your eyes again, and let the arguing scholars fade into the background. Instead, picture the board itself, not as a game, not as an academic curiosity under museum glass, but as something alive, something humming with mystery. Because somewhere along the long sweep of Egyptian history, Senet stopped being just a way to pass rainy days and became something far weightier. It became a rehearsal, a journey, a map for the soul after death. The squares of the board, 29 or 30 depending on the set, were no longer just spaces to hop across. They transformed into stages, each charged with meaning. To step your piece forward was to step your spirit into the unknown. To fall back was to stumble into trial. The last few squares especially were marked with special symbols, water ripples, birds, hieroglyphs that hinted at transition. These were not idle decorations, they were portals. Historians still debate the exact order, the exact meaning, but the consensus is clear. Late in its history, Senet was no longer just a game. It was a ritual path. Imagine an Egyptian scribe explaining this to a child, tracing the lines on a board. Here he says, pointing to one square is the house of water. If you land here, your spirit must endure the flood. His finger moves to another. Here is the house of three truths. Only the righteous may pass. The child listens wide-eyed, realizing that every move is more than chance. It is fate being rehearsed in miniature. You feel the weight of it too. Suddenly, your little clay token in your hand no longer feels like a toy. It feels like a soul. This was no accident. Egyptians believed life was only the beginning, that death was not an ending, but a crossing. The soul, Ba and K, spirit and essence, needed to navigate obstacles, trials, gates, and judges. Senet, with its zigzag path, offered a way to practice, to symbolically play out the cosmic journey before it became real. To win at Senet was not merely to best your opponent. It was to prove, in a sense, that your soul could reach the eternal fields of reeds, the paradise of the afterlife. Picture a nobleman in the New Kingdom reclining on a carved chair in his villa. His board is made of polished wood, inlaid with ivory squares and tiny gilded hieroglyphs. His servants bring him beer in painted cups. But as he moves his sleek ivory token forward, he isn't only passing time, he is rehearsing death. His opponent, perhaps a cousin, laughs as his own piece is sent back to the house of water, but the nobleman only smiles grimly, murmuring a prayer to Thoth, the god of wisdom. For him, this game is training a way to ensure his spirit will one day cross the Duat, the perilous underworld, without faltering. Quirky tidbit. Some tombs actually depict the deceased playing Senet against invisible opponents. On walls in the Valley of the Kings, we see painted figures seated before a board, their hands frozen mid-move. No rival is drawn in because the rival is none other than the unseen forces of fate. Imagine that you've died, you've been entombed, and your last portrait shows you locked in an eternal game, your spirit poised between victory and annihilation. It's haunting, isn't it? And archaeologists have uncovered actual boards buried with mummies. In some cases, the tokens are still set in place, as if the deceased was in the middle of a game when death interrupted, and now, millennia later, the match continues in eternity. Was the person meant to pick up where they left off in the afterlife, or was it staged a ritual setup, a cosmic save point for the soul? Historians still argue, but the imagery is powerful. The game never ends. It simply shifts realms. Think of how ordinary family arguments over senet must have changed in that atmosphere. Before, it might have been playful bickering. You cheated, brother. No, the dice were kind, but once the game carried spiritual weight, those same words may have tinged with awe. The gods have spoken, one might murmur as their token advanced. Beware you stumble near the house of rebirth, another might warn. Play and ritual fused as they so often do in human culture, until it was impossible to tell where laughter ended and prayer began. Mainstream fact. By the New Kingdom, Senate boards were sometimes inscribed with explicit religious texts. Spells from the Book of the Dead, the great funerary manual, appeared on or near the squares. One inscription reads, "The place of the soul's passage." Another, "The house of happiness." Suddenly the grid was no longer abstract at all, it was the map of eternity itself. When you sat down to play, you were engaging with the mysteries of existence. The rules were no longer just move a token forward, the rules were learn how to die well. Now close your eyes and picture a priest in a temple by the Nile. The rains have receded, the air is cool with night. Before him lies a senet board, not on a family table, but on an altar. He rolls, knucklebones, chants softly, moves a piece forward. This is no game, it is divination, a ritual, to determine whether the gods favor a journey, whether a soul is ready to pass judgment. Worshippers gather in hushed silence, watching as the tokens advance. Some gasp when a piece falls back, whispering that it is an ill omen. The priest continues calm and solemn, guiding fate, square by square. Quirky detail. Not all boards were equal. Some were beautifully portable, crafted with folding lids to store pieces inside like ancient travel sets. Others were monumental, carved into stone temple floors where they could never be moved. Imagine pilgrims kneeling to place tokens into grooves etched in the very temple steps, asking the gods for luck in their journey. Senet had grown far beyond children's clay doodles. It was now embedded in the architecture of faith. And yet, despite all this grandeur, the humble heart of the game remained. Families still scratched grids into dirt. Children still shaped lopsided animal tokens, laughter still filled mud brick homes. The duality is striking. The same board that meant cosmic salvation to a priest could mean simple fun to a child. Perhaps that's why Senet endured so long. It carried joy and gravity, leisure and eternity side by side. You lean back in your imagined Egyptian home, listening to the patter of rain easing outside. On the floor before you, a scratched board gleams faintly in lamplight. The tokens move, the game continues, and suddenly you see it differently. This isn't just passing time, this is humanity's first great metaphorical rehearsal for the unknown. To play Senet was to touch mystery with your fingertips, to laugh in the face of death, to say, I may not control the flood or the gods or the afterlife, but I can move my piece, I can take my turn, and I can hope. The thought is oddly comforting, timeless. Because isn't that still what we do today? We roll dice, flip cards, move pawns across boards, pretending we control fate while secretly knowing chance rules us all. The Egyptians just had the honesty to admit that their games were about life and death. Ours hide it under colourful boxes and tokens shaped like top hats. But the truth is the same. Every game is a little mirror of existence. And as you picture your last token reaching the final square shining, marked with hieroglyphs of victory, you feel it, not just the thrill of winning, but the relief. of safe passage. The rain outside stops, the night grows quiet. The Nile flows on eternal indifferent, yet carrying in its rhythm the same cycles of life, death, and rebirth that the Senate board tried to capture. One game ends, another begins. The journey never stops. You stretch your legs as though you've been sitting cross-legged on the packed dirt too long, and your mind drifts downriver with the current of time. You picture merchants and soldiers not lounging in the still air of home, but on the move boats rocking along the Nile, caravans trudging through desert wind camps, flickering with firelight. And with them comes something small, humble, yet indispensable, a foldable board game neatly packed away like a secret treasure. Because leisure travels. Even in ancient Egypt, people carried their amusements like talismans against boredom, against the long march of miles. Senate boards weren't always carved into temple floors or painted on tomb walls. Sometimes they were small and clever hinged boxes that opened into grids, their lids doubling as the playing surface. Inside the compartment, little ivory or clay tokens nestled together, waiting for the next throw of knuckle bones. Fold it shut, slip it into a travel satchel, and suddenly the Nile becomes your tavern, the desert your game room. Picture a merchant, robes dusty from weeks of trade, finally resting his bundle of goods on a reed mat in a riverside tavern. He orders a jug of beer, thick and cloudy, pours a cup, then taps the polished wood box at his side. A game he offers to a fellow traveller. Soon tokens are clicking, laughter bubbles up, and the weariness of the day lifts. The tavern fills with the smell of roasted fish and spiced lentils, and in the middle of it all, two strangers bond over squares and charts. You almost want to pull up a stool yourself. Quirky tidbit. Some of these travel boards were so finely made they resembled miniature coffers with lids that slid compartments that locked even little handles to carry them. Imagine owning one of those in 1400 BCE, a luxury gadget of its day, not unlike flashing the latest smartphone at an airport lounge. The difference, instead of games glowing on a screen, you had to shake knuckle bones and pray they didn't roll under the table. Historians still argue whether soldiers on campaign actually carried senet into the field, or whether that's romantic imagination filling gaps. What they do know is that portable boards exist, worn from use, found in contexts far from palaces. And really, can you picture a garrison of weary men on the edge of empire sharpening spears all day, not craving some distraction at night? The tents flap in the wind, the desert grows cold, and someone unpacks a foldable box. Soon commanders are hunched alongside foot soldiers, grumbling as fate smacks their tokens backward. Even in the business of war, you make time for play. You let your thoughts wander into that camp. Fires crackle, sparks drift upward, and the stars overhead are brilliant, the Milky Way spilling like silver paint. A soldier slaps the board shut in frustration. His piece just landed in the house of water, which everyone jokingly calls the drowning pit. His comrades roar with laughter. Another rolls knuckle bones and crows as his token leaps ahead. For a moment, swords and bows vanish. They are just men teasing, hoping, clinging to the illusion of control in a world where tomorrow might not come. Mainstream fact. Archaeologists have found not only wooden boards but also graffiti-like senet grids scratched into stone along trade routes. Travelers carved them into paving blocks, wayside shrines, even temple steps. It suggests that sometimes, even when no board was at hand, the itch to play was too strong to resist. You imagine merchants waiting for their caravan camels to be loaded idly, scratching a grid into sandstone, playing a quick round with pebbles before setting off again. The desert leaves no trace of their laughter now, but you can almost hear it on the wind. And then there are boats. Oh yes, the Nile was a game board in itself, but sailors carried the smaller kind too. Picture a wide wooden riverboat, sails billowing, cargo stacked high. At night, the crew ties up near the reeds. The deck becomes a living room. Someone lights an oil lamp, others bring dates and dried fish. The captain, stern by day, opens a box and reveals a senet set inlaid with mother of pearl. Soon the boat rocks with more than current, it rocks with banter, curses, cheers. The Nile flows on indifferent, but a board time slows into tokens sliding across polished squares. Quirky, human moment. Imagine a game interrupted by the sudden snap of a crocodile tail in the water nearby. The players freeze tokens in mid-move, then burst out laughing as the danger passes. You've had nights where your card game was interrupted by a sudden thunderclap or a cat leaping on the table. Different species, same chaos. And here's a thought: how many of those travel sets never made it home? Dropped into the Nile, buried under desert sand, lost in a collapsed tent. The ones archaeologists find are rare survivors, lucky enough to hide in tombs or dry caves. But the majority of boards, like the majority of lives, disappeared quietly. That oddly makes them feel more alive. You realize these weren't museum pieces, they were companions carried and used until they wore out, until wood splintered, and tokens rolled into dust. So you picture yourself packing for a journey. Instead of earbuds and a paperback, you slip a polished little box into your bag. Aboard tokens, knuckle bones. Wherever the Nile takes you, you have company, rain or heat, friend or stranger. The game unfolds the same way. Squares, tokens, laughter loss. Whether you are a soldier bracing for dawn's battle or a merchant bartering in foreign ports, the board is a comfort, a tether to normalcy. And the best part, you never really know how the game will end. Maybe your last token stumbles into the drowning square. Maybe it glides to paradise. Just like travel itself, you can plan, but fate rolls the knuckle bones. The fire in the camp gutters lower. The boat on the Nile drifts into darker water. The caravan bells jingle faintly as camels settle for the night. And across these scattered scenes, the same sound repeats, a soft click of tokens on wood, echoing across centuries, carrying forward a truth you already know deep down. Wherever humans go, they bring play with them. You lean back, still nestled inside that imagined mud brick house, but your thoughts begin to drift beyond this single family scene. You start to realize just how many Egyptian nights never found their way into history books. Think of the countless households scattered along the Nile Valley, from the bustling heart of Thebes to the quieter fishing villages by the marshes. Every one of those homes had its own version of game night, its own scratched-up boards, its own little tokens carried in the folds of baskets. And yet almost all of them are gone, washed away by flood or fire, or simply the passage of time. What you are holding in your imagination now is a fragment of fragments, a survivor in a world that has otherwise fallen silent. The truth is, historians can only work with what the earth chooses to give back. Sometimes that's a preserved tomb filled with treasures, where a polished Senate board waits like a loyal companion for a long-departed noble. Other times, it's nothing but a faint scratch on a shard of pottery, debated endlessly by experts who wonder whether it marks a child's doodle or a miniature grid for a lost game. You can almost picture them squinting at the pottery under museum lights, shrugging and quietly arguing for another decade or two. Historians still argue whether those faint patterns on mud brick walls were playful diversions or sacred diagrams of the afterlife. But you sense there's something strangely comforting in the fact that so much has been forgotten. It means the Egyptians were living ordinary lives, not thinking about how future generations would interpret their every scratch in the dirt. They weren't curating history, they were just trying to pass a rainy evening. Maybe a child lost a clay token in the rush mat, only for it to crumble into dust centuries later. Maybe two brothers argued over whose turn it was, slammed the board aside, and went to bed in a huff, leaving no trace but the faint echo you feel now. You realize that every laugh, every sigh, every muttered complaint was as real as your own game nights, even if it never left evidence behind. Imagine walking through a village just after the floodwaters recede. The earth is slick, sandals squelch in the mud, and a stray reed boat creaks against the bank. Inside one house, a family plays by lamplight, their game tokens smooth from use. In the next house, silence, just the hiss of rainwater dripping from the roof. Then down the lane, another home where children scratch lines in the dirt for their own version of Senate pebbles clattering in their hands. Multiply this scene by thousands, and then imagine that all those tiny moments have vanished, swallowed by centuries. What survives is only a handful of boards found in tombs like postcards from the dead. And yet you find a peculiar warmth in that thought. Not everything needs to be preserved to matter. The memory of those forgotten nights lingers in a different way in the recognition that humans have always sought connection and play, even when the larger world was harsh and unpredictable. The Egyptians weren't just building monuments to impress the gods. They were building evenings of laughter and companionship to soothe themselves. That's the kind of legacy you can feel, even when the material proof has dissolved. Mainstream fact archaeologists know that board games like Senet were among the most popular pastimes in Egypt, evidenced by dozens of surviving boards across 3,000 years. But the quirky tidbit is that many of those boards were found broken, incomplete, or heavily worn down, as if reminding us that they weren't made for show, but for constant handling, constant play. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a battered deck of Uno cards, edges, frayed rules. Occasionally bent, everyone's still enjoying themselves anyway. You picture an old wooden board carved, simply carried from house to house like a trusted friend. Over time its edges chip, the lines fade, the tokens go missing. And one evening maybe it breaks in half, discarded on the rubbish heap, only to dissolve in the damp earth. Gone forever, except for the story it leaves you to imagine tonight. That story, you realize, might be just as powerful as the object itself. So as you drift further into this moment, the forgotten Egyptian nights feel close, as if you could reach through the veil of time and hear the soft clicks of tokens, the laughter, the bickering, the triumph, the defeat. They come alive not because they are written down, but because they are repeated endlessly across generations of human beings, doing the same thing, trying to pass the time together, trying to make sense of fate with a handful of pebbles and a scratched board. And in that recognition you find something profoundly human and profoundly soothing. You linger in that hush of forgotten evenings, but slowly the story shifts. Not every scratched grid in the dirt survives the centuries, and not every lopsided clay token finds its way into a tomb. Yet out of that sea of play and improvisation, one game begins to tower over the rest Senet. You can almost see it taking shape like a boat rising from mist, its squares neatly aligned, its path winding like the very course of human life. It starts simple, just another board among boards, just another way to move pebbles along a line, but gradually, Senet isn't just a pastime, it becomes the pastime. The squares take on meaning, the movements become metaphor. Each roll of the sticks, each hop of the token, starts to look suspiciously like something more than chance. And you realize, sitting there on that packed earth floor, that this game isn't about passing a rainy afternoon anymore, it's about passing through existence itself. You imagine a family of modest means playing Senet with clay and wood, laughing, teasing, occasionally accusing each other of cheating, because some habits never change. But in the house next door, a scribe has scratched the board into plaster, playing with a fellow clerk by oil lamp, the glow catching the edge of the carved squares. And in the palace the nobles have boards inlaid with ivory and lapis lazuli, gleaming with wealth. Different materials, different players, but the same board. Senet spreads across Egypt like a quiet tide. Mainstream fact. By the time of the New Kingdom, Senet was the most popular and widely recognized board game in Egypt. It's found in tomb paintings carved into sarcophagi, even placed inside burial chambers to accompany the dead. Quirky tidbit. Some boards were double-duty pieces, play one side for Senet, flip it over for a different game entirely, like the ancient equivalent of a board game combo pack. And historians still argue whether the surviving boards were meant more for play or for ritual, because somewhere along the way the game crossed a threshold. It wasn't just for fun anymore, it was for eternity. Picture a noblewoman arranging her tokens, whispering a prayer under her breath. Each move is a small act of faith. Land here and you're safe. Land there and you're delayed, blocked, sent back. The squares come alive with cosmic weight. They are not just markings, they are symbols of life's journey, of the underworld, of trials faced and overcome. The rain still patters against mud brick walls, the family still chuckles as someone topples a token. But across town, a priest sets the same tokens on the same grid, with an entirely different seriousness. For him, it's not about bragging rights or passing time. It's about guiding the soul through its obstacles, finding a path to the blessed fields of the afterlife. The game has become two things at once: ordinary play and sacred passage. And this is where you pause because the shift feels familiar. How many of your own games, tucked away in closets or stacked in living rooms, carry some secret, symbolic meaning? Maybe not cosmic fate, but echoes of bigger truths. Monopoly, reflecting capitalism's cruel grind. Chess, embodying strategy and hierarchy. Even a deck of cards tracing the calendar's cycles. Humans can't resist giving meaning to their play. The Egyptians, true to form, went all in. You trace the path of a Senate board in your mind, 30 squares in 3 neat rows of 10. The last 5 squares, those are the ones heavy with symbolism. They carry the weight of crossing thresholds of transformation. They hint at rebirth, safety, and eternity. You move a token across them, slowly savoring the motion. Outside, the Nile floods as it always does, but inside you are rehearsing the soul's journey, one square at a time. And maybe you smile because you see the duality. Children laughing, adults arguing, neighbors gathering, all very human, very ordinary. But overlaying it all, priests chanting, scribes recording, nobles solemnly sliding ivory pieces into place. Same board, same tokens, 2 games in one, both played at once. Both played at. So Senet rises above the rest. Not because it was the flashiest or most complex, but because it spoke a truth Egyptians already felt deep in their bones. That life is a journey, that fate is fickle, and that what happens to your soul might be decided by something as small as where your token lands. And with that thought, you lean back against the wall, listening to the faint echo of pieces clicking across centuries. The rain has quieted. The oil lamp flickers. You realize the story of Egyptian games is not just about entertainment, it's about survival, legacy, and the quiet comfort of pattern. And now, as the echoes of Senet drift into silence, you let your body soften. The story of tokens and boards and rainy evenings has wound itself around you like a blanket. The Egyptians sat where you sit now, listening to rain, chasing laughter in lamplight, marking lines in clay. Their world was loud with floods and work and ceremony, yet in those small games they found a stillness not so different from the one you are sinking into. The squares blur their meanings, dissolving into something simple, just the comfort of a path, the rhythm of moving forward one small step at a time. You don't need to know the rules anymore. You don't need to win. You only need to rest, knowing that across thousands of years, humans have always sought this same calm, through play, through ritual, through quiet togetherness. The lamplight dims in your imagination. The rain slows to a whisper. You hear the Nile in the distance, steady as breath, eternal as sleep. You picture the board, the tokens, the hands that moved them all, fading gently into shadow. And with them, your own thoughts can fade too. Let the weight ease from your body, the tension from your mind. Each exhale sets down another token. Each inhale moves you one step closer to peace. The journey is not rushed. The game is not lost. It is simply paused, waiting for you on the other side of sleep. And now it is time to rest. Close your eyes, drift. Let the story end where the dream begins.